Okay, we're finished with this credenza. This is video 2 of 2. We're gonna go through this cabinet real quick and just kind of go over what we finished. Obviously we got all the drawers done. We can see all the doors. The faux bamboo trim is on everything. And yeah, we're gonna talk about this cabinet. And the first thing I want to do though is go over some of the details that we missed from the last video. I am new to this, so bear with me. All right, let's start off with these trims. We're going to use an 1/8 inch half round bit. These white side bits are awesome. I've run so much trim with these bits. I don't have to buy them very often. But anyway, you see me just running this half round bit. And look over the table saw. I'm just going to cut these trims to their depth. And then we're basically going to glue all these trims on. So we'll whack them up with a miter saw and edge sand them close, or disc sand them close. And we'll get these things fitted in there where they go. It's not necessary to put any kind of a mechanical fastener when you're attaching these trims. The wood glue and all the surface area around this trim, because the trim is attached basically at 3 points on the piece of trim. It's unnecessary to put anything other than wood glue. You could put a festool, domino in there. You could put a biscuit if you really wanted to. In a higher production situation, having a biscuit in there would actually be advantageous for production speed, but it's completely unnecessary. I have cabinets that are 30 years old that my stepdad built that are glued on with wood glue and clamps, and they stay forever. So yeah, don't worry about that trim staying. It's not going anywhere. It'll be just fine. All right, so we covered all the things that I forgot in my last video. Now we need to start adding all of our hinges. And this cabinet uses Euro hinges. Like I said, I can't get people to use butt hinges anymore. They all want Euro hinges. So I set all my hinge plates at 3.5 inches. That's what I do with pretty much all my doors. It's kind of a standard thing. I'm going to mark where all those locations go. And I have a tool here that I make, and I make lots of these little, they just basically got a 90-degree angle and a couple of holes spaced out 2 3/8 of an inch. And that's basically the depth of where you want that hinge plate to go when you're using an inset Blum hinge. And it just helps to aid production. Like I said, it's just a little piece of probably 03 aluminum, and it works fantastic. You can make these jigs for anything. You can make them for installing, magnets, different kinds of hinges, just whatever you need that's going to be a production item. So here you can see me from a different view, just installing all these hinges. And we're going to go ahead and, like I said, map it all out. And then we'll move over to drilling all of the pilot holes. So basically I've got a centering bit, and I'm using my jig, which also has a chamfer on it. And we're gonna go ahead, countersink, and we're gonna go ahead and drill all those centering bits in there. Then I'm able to just slide that hinge plate on there, run my screws in, and it's done. I don't have to think about it. There's not a ton of measuring. It's just basically measuring the 3.5 inch location, putting my jig on there, and then installing these things. So it's a very quick process and it saves a lot of time. So now when you go ahead and cut out all of our fronts, we're gonna cut out our doors and our drawer fronts. I'm gonna go over my shitty panel saw. I'm gonna cut all these pieces up. And again, I use my panel saw for cutting things kind of close. Then I go over my edge sander and I square everything up with my edge sander. Some people like to use a router jig. This is just what I have because my edge sander is right there, and belts are cheap, and it goes so fast and so easy. But then we'll run over to our table saw, and we're basically going to take our square side, which I generally mark with an X and an X for square, so that I always know what my square side is. Then we go ahead and we run these through the table saw. Run them through there, and it's going to square up your other side. And now you got a nice square door, right? And you got a nice square front, and that's basically cabinet making. And cabinet making is just putting boxes inside of boxes, inside of boxes, inside of boxes. And the squarer you can make things, the easier your assembly goes as you move deeper and deeper into your furniture build. So keeping things as square as possible is super important. But anyway, 2 of these doors are slightly larger than the other 2 doors. And as we're gapping things, we may find out that those cabinets are reduced down. So here we're gonna go ahead and we're just gonna label everything. I always label everything. I label what is up, I give it a number or a letter. And anyway, so we're putting our 3.5 inch lines on our doors, and we'll run over to our drill press here. And the drill press, I just have set up, it's the only thing I use this drill press for, and this is just as old school as it gets. So we're just going to pop all these 35 millimeter holes in here with our Forstner bit, or 1 3/8 inches. And I'm gonna pop all these in here, and then we'll be able to run back over to the other side of the shop, and we'll start installing all of our hinges. But It's important that if you're going to have any kind of a production shop, that you have tools set up just to do one specific function. And while there are tools that make this job even easier, it's unnecessary. Like I said, we're a $2 million outfit. We make thousands of pieces a year, deliver thousands of pieces a year. So a drill press is fine. You know, we got 2-3 guys running this thing all the time, and no one ever, you're never waiting on a tool, so that's not an issue. But anyway, you can see here that I'm gonna go ahead and pop in these holes to install these hinges. And the hinges that I use are what they call Insta hinges. And they basically just have a clamping method. You're gonna slide that hinge in there, push a lever down, and then it basically activates the cam on the inside that holds that hinge in place. It's much faster than using a screw-on. It holds very well, and I've never had any issues with it. It's been a fantastic hinge to use for speedy production type applications that still have high quality. We'll go ahead and get all these doors put in here. And as you can see, I've run over to the table saw if I need to cut things up at all because the doors don't fit correctly. And all I'm trying to do right now is just get the doors to close properly. I'm not worried about gaps. I'm just trying to make sure everything closes without touching. That's really where I'm going from here. And once all my doors are in there, you know, I'll go ahead and get all my magnets put in. And these magnets are easy to install. And again, I'm gonna make some kind of just generic tool that I'm going to use to install all of these magnets. You know, so we'll find center. There's my goofy little tool, and all that does is just shows me, you know, where I need to put my magnet. Makes it super easy to install. I used to do this with double-sided tape. Now I just use this little jig. Makes my life a lot easier. Now here I'm getting to the back side of the cabinet. I'm actually going to spend a little bit of time on this because this is kind of important. What I'm doing here is I'm fixing anything on the back side of the cabinet that isn't flush, right? Because I want my back to lay on there nice and pretty, because if someone ever looks back in there, I don't want to see a bunch of gaps, right? Like if a craftsman were looking at the back of my cabinet, I want them to go, oh good, that looks nice. I don't want anything to catch the customer's eye, right? Gaps catch the customer's eye. So we go ahead and we block, like I said, block plane the back of this thing, and make sure everything's nice and smooth. I fill any gaps, right? So if there's any gaps that weren't closed up during the glue up, I close those things up. And now you can see I'm putting my back on here. I'm clamping my cabinet up so that if there's any sagging or bowing of any kind, I'm gonna fix that with the back. The back provides a ton of structure to any cabinet. So it's very important that you take extra time and make sure that back is on there straight. Everything is nice and flat and clean, because the back is very important. I don't think a lot of people give the back enough credit. It's a super important piece of a cabinet. So from here, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna gap our doors, right? We don't gap until a back is in the cabinet. You know, and I'll say it again, do not gap a cabinet till your back is in the cabinet. So anyway, I got my little 1000 shim here, and I'm gonna put this shim on here, and I'm gonna mark all of these locations for my 1000 gap, okay? We'll get all these locations marked with a pencil, and I'm gonna run this thing over to, again, my edge sander, you know, which is where I take everything. I'm gonna edge sand the door up to all of my lines, right? So when I look at my gaps, come back and it's gonna look good. You know, sometimes you may have to go over another time to get these gaps looking good, but it's important that you take the time to get the gaps set at 10/100ths of an inch, because when you add your edge banding, that's gonna leave you with an 0.6 or a 32nd of an, excuse me, a 16th of an inch gap, you know, which is what you want. You want uniform gaps throughout your cabinet. And because we paint furniture, we need to allow for a little bit of primer and paint buildup to close that gap up to what we ultimately want, which is about, you know, 4 to 500ths of an inch. So same thing here, just getting all these gaps done on our doors, making sure everything looks good. You know, we'll move on to the drawers, right? I'm gonna sand the front of my drawers here, and I'll get my drawer fronts put on, which I'll show you my technique for that. Here I'm putting double-sided tape on the front of all my drawers. I'm gonna pre-drill all of my holes for where I want my screws to go in. But you can see I put a block on the front of my front, and I'm gonna use a shim to lay that drawer front right where I want it. And then the same process is gonna happen, right? We're gonna run the screws in there, and we're gonna go ahead and use our gapping chip, and we're gonna go ahead and gap these drawer fronts just like we did the doors. And that's gonna allow us to get our all of our gaps to be uniform to 0.10 of an inch so we can move on to our edge banding process. We just edge band everything without thinking about it. So I've got all these tools here. You know, I've got upholstery shears. I've got that's actually a metal file. I don't use a laminate file. We've got our edge banding. We've got a couple different irons. You know, I like this little digital one. It's kind of nice. I also use a regular, you know, regular one that I stole from my wife. Like, it just, anything works fine. The point is to get that glue on the back side of your edge banding up to, you know, whatever it is, like 300-400 degrees. Okay, so we'll take off all of our hinges. Make sure you put your hinges back in the same location because everything's adjusted, you know, so you don't want to have to mess with that later on. We just put on all of our edge banding like you've done a million times. We iron it. We hit it with a block of wood to make sure it's on there nice and tight. And then we're going to go ahead and sand all of our edges. And then we'll take that metal file and we're going to file off all of that material. You can use a laminate file. Laminate file works just fine. You can use a sanding block, sanding, whatever fits your purpose. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to edge band all this stuff. And of course, everyone wants to come and talk to me because it's just how it goes, right? I'm like, get away from me. I've got work to do. So, you know how it goes. I want to make a cabinet. People just want to talk constantly. But anyway, we're getting all this edge banding put on here. We're going to file this stuff down, sand it, get it looking good, and we'll be done with all the edge banding. But just knock out all your edge banding all at once. All right, so we got our cabinet. All the edge banding is done. I'm going to sand everything. I need to sand the front and the back side of these doors for my purposes because I need to do this before I put on my trim, my faux bamboo trim, because you don't want to sand a cabinet after the trim's put on. It's a pain in the butt, and it's just it's not worth doing. So you pre-sand everything first, then we'll do all of our trim work. That's an important tip if you're going to paint your cabinet. And if you're going to do wood, you know, it's probably important to do the same thing as well because no one wants to sand around trim. It's just a pain in the butt. So save yourself some work later on. Pre-sand everything before you do your trim work. Now we're going to make our faux bamboo. This is our silicone mold. This is the smaller diameter bamboo. One is 1 inch. This one, I believe, is 1/2 inch. So we need to mix this up with our 2-part. We're going to hit it with a little bit of mold release. Just helps to prolong the life of the molds. You can get like 50 pores maybe. If you use that mold release, it just helps kind of, you know, get a few more pores out of it. You know, maybe you get 60, 70 pores out of it. But pour this epoxy in here. And I'm going to let this stuff dry. After about 10-15 minutes, it dries and you can take it out. It should come out fairly easily. As the mold loses its usefulness, it will degrade and it will be harder to take that stuff out. So that's a sign. Here we're going to edge sand all the back of our trim. It needs to have a nice flat surface so that it will bond to the wood better with our CA glue. So like I said, I just hit this thing real quick with the edge sander, goes super fast, and I move on to getting it attached to the door. So you can see I've got my profile laid out on my door there, and I'm going to start cutting all this faux bamboo trim. And this is a tedious process. There is a much faster way to do this, which is to make a mold of the trim pattern that goes on the door instead of a mold of simply just a piece of faux bamboo. But for these purposes, I'm going to show you how I do this. We're going to clean the trim up, make sure it looks nice before we glue it on. We don't want to try and clean it up after it's glued on because then we're going to damage the door. And we want to keep that door nice and pristine because we've already sanded it. So fitting all of these trim pieces on here, we line up all of our center points and all of our marks that we've made to make sure that all of our trim pieces line up on the cabinet. So here I'm marking where I need to make all these 45-degree cuts, and I've gone over my edge sander and I'm just edge sanding. There's just tons of back and forth on this. If you have an edge sander on a stand, you can bring it over to where you're working, which will make your life a lot easier. So this, again, we're just checking all of these pieces. We are making sure the 45s are good, and we're going to CA glue these onto our specific locations that we've mapped out on our door, and we're going to pin nail every knuckle. And this is just a 1/2 inch 23 gauge pin nail. You'll see that again, hand fitting all of this stuff, and again pin nailing it and CA gluing it. So it is not a fast process, so you have to be patient. If you don't have that patience, I would not recommend doing this because it will drive you batshit crazy. Because yeah, it's just nothing but your thoughts and looking at trim and trim and trim. So you can see me just sand and stuff away, make sure it looks good. We CA glue it on here and activate it. We'll pin nail it, and yeah, just embrace the suck, because this is how it's going to be. And we got one more clip here, show me doing this. These are the interior bits, and again, making a mold of this piece is so much easier than hand fitting each single quarter of this interior piece. So, you know, for purposes of this video, I'm just showing you how I hand cut these things, go over and disc sand them, and line them up, CA glue them, the whole shebang. So again, be patient. Here's one final fast time-lapse video of me doing this. It's my edge sander with my little 45-degree jig. Again, be super patient. All be worth it in the end, but again, be patient. Now I'll move on to the drawer front. I'm just going to show you one drawer front. I'm going to map everything out where it needs to go, and this will be a much faster clip. Same process as before. Trim down all of our pieces. We're going to 45-degree sand them, put them where everything goes. Now these pieces aren't long enough, so we cut our trim piece at the knuckle, and then we can glue on a second piece to get the length that we need, but you have to sand all of your pieces accordingly and line everything up accordingly. Trim pieces, because the ones that I have are not long enough. I think the longest one I have is like 36 inches, and I think this front is like 45 inches. So fit all those pieces on there, and that's going to get us to the length that we need. We'll map out our end pieces, make sure that we have a nice knuckle in the center. It looks really nice. And we'll again trim these up, go over and edge sand them or disc sand them. And we'll glue them on, and this will be the end of the trim, the tedious trim. Now the fun part, we can put all our doors back on, and again, if you've followed everything correctly, all these doors should go back in place right where they need to go. The gaps should look good. There shouldn't be a lot of adjustment. Okay, so now you gotta put in all your shelf pins. So I just put tape on a drill bit. I have a jig, just pretty standard operating procedure here. Pop these holes in. I do the most minimal amount of shelf pin holes that I can. A ton of shelf pin holes just looks cheap to me. It looks like, you know, commercial furniture or like a kitchen cabinet, you know, so just put in, you know, 5, 6, 7 holes at the most and call it good. You know, you can always add more later. Anyone can add holes. It's not a big deal. Don't make your cabinet look cheap by having a crap ton of holes. All right, so we made it to the end. This is a completed credenza. The cabinet is gapped and ready for primer and, sandings, primer, and paint. The legs look good, the trims look good, like the gaps look good, and our drawer boxes, our nice cherry drawer boxes, are on soft close slides. We've got our shelves in there, and we have nice traditional construction, frame and panel construction, which customers love. You can get good money for these kind of cabinets that have these traditional elements, but people love soft close drawers and soft close doors. It's just part of making furniture today. So yeah, I hope you like this video, and I will be making more videos. Please put in the comments any videos that you would like to see in the future. I make all kinds of pieces of furniture. So yep, thanks so much. Have a great one.